The sun beat down on the roofs of Fairview, a town so quiet you could almost hear the grass growing. It was the kind of place where nothing much changed, and for a man like Dan Miller, that was just fine. He'd been an officer here for 20 years, cruising these same streets in his black and white patrol car. He knew the baker who always had a free donut, the old lady who needed her cat rescued from a tree every spring, and every kid who'd ever dinged a mailbox with a baseball. He saw himself not just as a cop, but as the neighborhood watch, the friendly face, the guy who kept the peace without much trouble. His patrol car rolled slowly down Maple Lane, a street lined with big, comfortable houses with neat lawns and flower beds. The air conditioning hummed, and his personal cooler sat on the passenger seat, filled with ice and bottles of water. It was a scorcher of a day, the kind that made the pavement shimmer. Then he saw the truck. A big orange moving van was parked in the driveway of 211 Maple Lane, its back doors wide open. The house, a white colonial with dark green shutters, had been empty for a few months. New neighbors. Dan felt a flicker of interest. New people meant new stories, new routines to learn. He liked knowing things first. He pulled the cruiser to a gentle stop a few houses down, just observing. Movers in gray T-shirts were hauling a large, fabric-wrapped couch up the driveway. And there, directing them, was the new neighbor. She was a black woman, probably in her late 20s or early 30s, dressed in practical clothes for a mauve light blue jeans and a simple white T-shirt. She pointed toward the porch, saying something to the movers with a confident smile. She moved with an easy authority, like someone used to being in charge. Dan watched her for a full minute. He didn't recognize her, which was unusual. She wasn't from around here, that was clear. A thought formed in his mind. A welcome. That's what a good community officer would do. Introduce himself, make them feel safe, show them that Fairview looked out for its own. He'd done it 100 times. But Dan had his own style. He wasn't one for stiff, formal handshakes. He liked to break the ice, to be the friendly, casual guy who put people at ease with a little joke. He looked at his cooler. The ice water inside was beating on the plastic bottles. A grin spread across his face. Perfect. A hot day, a new neighbor working hard. A little splash of cool water would be a funny way to say hello. A playful gesture. In his mind, he saw himself tossing the water near her feet, making her jump and laugh, saying, "Welcome to Fairview. Gotta cool off." It would be a story she'd tell about the quirky, friendly cop who welcomed her. He climbed out of the car, the heat hitting him like a wall. He reached into the cooler and pulled out a large, wax-coated paper cup. He filled it to the brim with the icy water, the condensation immediately making the cup damp. He left his patrol cap on the seat. This wasn't official business. This was neighborly. He walked up the driveway, the gravel crunching under his boots. The movers glanced at him, nodded, but kept working. The woman had her back turned, checking a clipboard. "Afternoon," Dan said, his voice loud and cheerful. She turned around. Up close, he could see she was tired but energetic, her eyes sharp and intelligent. She offered a polite, somewhat guarded smile. "Hello, hot one, isn't it?" "That it is," Dan said, holding up the cup. His grin felt easy on his face. This was his town, his routine. "Welcome to Fairview. Thought you might need this." He didn't wait for her to reach for it. He didn't hand it to her. He executed his plan. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the contents of the cup toward her, aiming for the ground by her sneakers, intending a playful splash. But things went wrong in a split second. Maybe he misjudged the distance. Maybe his hand was wet from the cup. Maybe it was just a stupid idea from the start. The arc of the water was wrong. Instead of hitting the driveway at her feet, the entire cup full a shocking amount of cold, Icy water splashed directly onto the legs of her light blue jeans, soaking them dark in an instant. It splattered up onto her white t-shirt, leaving big, wet blotches. A piece of ice slid down her neck. The sound she made was a sharp, involuntary gasp. She stumbled back a step, her clipboard clattering to the ground. Her hands flew up, not to catch water that wasn't there, but in a pure reflex of shock and defense. The movers stopped dead, a dresser hanging between them in mid-air. All the cheerful noise of the move, the grunts, the instructions, the scraping of furniture stopped. The street was suddenly, terribly silent, save for the drone of a lawnmower somewhere in the distance. Dan's smile stayed frozen on his face for a second too long. The joke was over, but his expression hadn't caught up. He saw her face change. The polite guard vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Then, as she looked down at her drenched clothes, feeling the cold seep through, disbelief hardened into something else. Something cold and furious. He finally found his voice. "Just a little welcome," he said, and the words sounded hollow and dumb even to him. He gave a weak chuckle, trying to salvage it, to make her see the humor. "Gotta cool off on a day like this." She didn't laugh. She didn't yell. Her eyes locked onto his, and the anger in them was so focused it was like a physical force. Without breaking eye contact, she slowly reached into the pocket of her wet jeans and pulled out her smartphone. A cold trickle of unease, entirely different from the ice water, went down Dan's spine. This wasn't going the way it did with old Mr. Jenkins when he'd playfully confiscated his gardening hose on a hot day. This was different. She held the phone up, the camera lens pointed right at him. Her thumb tapped the screen. A small red light appeared. She was recording. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm. Too calm. It was the calm of a dam holding back a flood. "What?" she said, each word clear and precise. "Is your name and your badge number?" Dan blinked. The unease turned to a flare of annoyance. Who did she think she was? He was just being friendly. This was an overreaction. A big one. He was the authority here. He was Officer Dan Miller. His posture stiffened. The friendly neighbor act dropped away, replaced by the cop face he used for traffic stops. He puffed out his chest a little, his hands going to his belt. "Whoa, relax," he said, his own voice losing its warmth. It was a joke. A welcome. No need for that. He gestured vaguely at the phone. She didn't lower it. The red light kept glowing. "Your name and badge number. Now." The command in her voice was undeniable. Flustered, his face growing warm under the sun, he complied, but with a tone of warning. "Officer Dan Miller, badge 47. And you need to understand, ma'am, that recording an officer during a friendly interaction can be seen as..." She cut him off, still filming. "This is not a friendly interaction. You have just assaulted me. I am making a record of it." The word assaulted hit him like a slap. Assault? Over a little water? This was insane. This woman was clearly looking for trouble, a city person with a chip on her shoulder, bringing drama to his quiet street. His anger rose, mixing with a stubborn defensiveness. He wouldn't be disrespected like this, not on his own turf. "I'm going to run your license plate," he announced, a power move, something to regain control. "You just stand right there." It was a meaningless threat. She wasn't in her car, but it sounded official. It was his ground to stand on. He turned his back on her, on the unblinking eye of her phone, and walked with what he hoped was an air of unconcerned authority back to the safety of his patrol car. He could feel the eyes of the movers, and he was sure the eyes of neighbors behind curtains, watching him. He slid into the driver's seat, the familiar smell of old coffee and vinyl, a small comfort. He glanced in the rearview mirror. She was still there, standing in her wet clothes in the middle of the driveway. But she wasn't just standing. She was on another call now, speaking quickly and clearly into her phone. He saw one of the movers hand her a towel, which she accepted with a nod, but didn't use, her attention completely on the call. Across the street, old Mr. Gable, the retired councilman, was standing on his porch, arms crossed, watching the whole scene with a deep frown. Dan shook his head, muttering to the empty car. Oversensitive. Making a mountain out of a molehill. He reached for his radio mic, intent on following through, on calling in the moving truck's plates just to do something. He was still in charge of this situation. He was sure of it. He never got the chance to press the button. The cruiser's police radio. A separate channel from his shoulder mic crackled to life with an urgent, professional tone that was rarely used for routine matters. The dispatcher's voice was tight, strained. Unit 47 respond. Code 10 to 99 at your immediate location. Civilian complaint logged. Command requests your immediate standby. Repeat, stand by at your location. Do not engage. Chief is en route. Dan froze, the mic halfway to his lips. Code 10 to 99. Officer needs assistance, but it was being used for him. The chief? Coming here? For this? Before his brain could even process this, his personal cell phone, clipped to his sun visor, started buzzing violently. He fumbled for it. The screen flashed. Chief Roberts. His thumb, suddenly slippery, swiped to answer. Chief? Done. The chief's voice was a low, sharp bark, leaving no room for greeting or question. Listen to me. Stand down. Do not move your vehicle. Do not speak to that woman again. Do not say one more word to anyone. I am 2 minutes out. You just sit there and wait. Do you understand? The line went dead dot. Then Miller sat in the aisle. The silence in the patrol car was a heavy, living thing. It pressed in on Dan from all sides, louder than any siren. He could hear the frantic thump of his own heart against his ribs, a drumbeat of pure panic. The chief's words, "We are profoundly sorry," kept replaying in his head, each time sending a fresh jolt of ice through his veins. He watched, frozen, through the windshield. Chief Roberts was a tall, broad-shouldered man who had once been a formidable street cop himself. Don had seen him chew out rookies, confront angry council members, and handle crisis situations with a stern, unshakable calm. But the man standing in that driveway now was different. His shoulders were slightly hunched, not in weakness, but in a posture of deep deference. He was listening, really listening, to the woman to Deputy Chief Johnson. And Don couldn't hear the words, but he could see her. She had put her phone away. She was speaking, her gestures controlled but firm. She pointed once to her wet jeans, then swept a hand toward Dan's cruiser. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't crying. She was giving a report. A cold, precise, devastating report. And the chief of the Fairview Police Department was receiving it like a subordinate. A movement to his left made Dan flinch. Old Mr. Gable from across the street was walking slowly down his porch steps and across his perfect lawn. He wasn't coming toward Dan. He was walking toward the chief and the deputy chief. Mr. Gable had been on the city council for 30 years. He knew everyone, and more importantly, he knew how everything worked. He stopped a respectful distance away, waiting. When Deputy Chief Johnson paused, she noticed him and gave a small, tight nod. Mr. Gable stepped forward, shook her hand, and then began speaking to Chief Roberts. His expression was grave, disappointed. He glanced once toward Dan's car, and that single look felt like a physical blow. It was the look you gave a teenager who just vandalized a mailbox, not a 20-year veteran. Dan's hands were gripping the steering wheel, so tight his knuckles were white. His mind was a storm of fragmented thoughts, each one more terrifying than the last. Asterisk County Deputy Chief, my new boss. Assault. I threw water on my boss. She filmed it. The chief called it unacceptable behavior. My pension. My job. What will my wife say? What will everyone say? Asterisk. A sharp rap on the passenger side window made him jump nearly out of his skin. It was Sergeant Lewis, a younger officer Dan had trained years ago. Lewis's face was pale, his official mask firmly in place, but his eyes held a confused alarm. He motioned for Dan to roll down the window. The mechanical whir of the window sounded deafening. Dan, Lewis said, his voice low and urgent. The chief wants you to go to the station. Now, right now. I'm to follow you. Do not stop. Do not talk to anyone. Just drive. Lewis, what's? Dan started, his voice a dry croak. Now? Dan. Lewis cut him off, his tone leaving no room for argument. Just go. Numbly, Dan put the car in drive. He pulled away from the curb, the tires crunching on the gravel. In his rearview mirror, he saw the scene shrink. The chief, the deputy chief in her wet clothes, Mr. Gable, the movers now standing completely still, watching the police drama unfold instead of moving furniture. It was a tableau of his professional ruin. The 5-minute drive to the station was the longest of his life. Every familiar house, every street sign, seemed to mock him. This was his kingdom, and he had just set fire to the throne. Sergeant Lewis's cruiser followed closely behind, not like an escort, but like a guard transporting a prisoner. The Fairview Police Department was a modest brick building. Dan usually pulled into his designated spot with a sense of ownership. Today, he felt like a stranger. As he walked to the entrance, he saw faces in the windows of the briefing room. Officers and dispatchers, their expressions a mix of shock, curiosity, and pity. The news had traveled faster than his car. He didn't go to the locker room. He didn't go to the break room. He went straight to the chief's office, as he knew he was expected to. The door was open. Chief Roberts's secretary, a woman who had always offered him a smile and a piece of candy, wouldn't meet his eyes. Go on in, she said softly, staring at her computer screen. Chief Roberts was sitting behind his desk, but he wasn't working. He was staring out the window, his hands steepled in front of his face. He didn't turn when Dan entered. Close the door, the chief said, his voice flat. Dan did. The click of the latch sounded final. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the old air conditioner. Finally, Chief Roberts swiveled his chair around. The disappointment on his face was so deep it looked like grief. Dan, he began, then stopped, shaking his head. What in God's name were you thinking? The dam inside Dan broke. The words tumbled out in a defensive rush. Chief, it was a misunderstanding. A complete misunderstanding. It was a hot day. I saw her moving in. I thought I'd be friendly, you know. A little welcome. I was just trying to be funny. I was going to splash it near her feet. It was just a joke, and she completely overreacted. She pulled out her phone. She was hostile from the get-go. Stop. The chief's voice was quiet, but it sliced through Dan's rambling like a knife. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Dan's. Let me be crystal clear, so you understand the gravity of the situation you have created. That woman is Keisha Johnson. She started this morning as the Deputy Chief of Operations for the County Law Enforcement Agency. She oversees our budget, our policies, our interdepartmental conduct. She is, for all practical purposes, sitting in this room right now, my boss. And you assaulted her with a thrown liquid on her own property while she was filming you. And then you attempted to intimidate her by threatening to run her plates. Hearing it stated so bluntly, so officially, stripped all the excuses away. Dan's shoulders slumped. I didn't know who she was, he whispered. but it sounded weak even to him. That is the only thing saving you from being walked out of this building in handcuffs right this second, the chief said, his voice rising slightly. The only thing. Do you think that matters to her? Do you think it matters to the county commissioner she was on the phone with? Do you think it matters to the retired city councilman who witnessed the whole thing and is already drafting a letter to the mayor? She didn't know you either, Dan. She saw a uniformed police officer, a representative of this town's authority, throw a substance on her and then get confrontational when she questioned it. How do you think that looked? Dan had no answer. He stared at the floor. She could press charges. She would win. She could file a civil lawsuit against you and the department. She would win. She could recommend the county freeze our operational funding pending a review of departmental culture, and she would win. The chief stood up and walked to the window, his back to Dan. 20 years, Dan. 20 years of good service. And you threw it away with a cup of water and a bad attitude. What? What happens now? Dan asked, his voice hollow. Now, the chief sighed, you are suspended, immediately, with pay for now, pending an internal investigation. You will turn in your badge, your gun, and your department ID. You will go home. You will speak to no one about this, not the press, not your buddies, no one. You will wait for the union rep to contact you, and you will pray that Deputy Chief Johnson accepts a profound, public apology and chooses not to destroy your career and smear this department's name across the county. He turned back, opened a drawer, and pulled out a form. He slid it across the desk with a pen. Sign this. It's your acknowledgement of the suspension and the surrender of your equipment. Dan picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. He scrawled his name on the line, his signature looking like a child's. He slowly unclipped his badge from his chest. It felt heavier than it ever had. He placed it on the desk. He took his service weapon from its holster, cleared it with trembling hands, and placed it next to the badge. He pulled his ID wallet from his back pocket and added it to the pile. The object sat on the chief's polished wood desk, a tiny, sad collection that represented his entire adult life. Go home. Dan, the chief said, his anger spent, replaced by a weary exhaustion. And for your sake, and for your family's sake, I hope you start to understand what you've actually done. It wasn't a joke. It was a catastrophic failure of judgment. Dan walked out of the office. The hallway seemed longer, the lights brighter. He passed the briefing room again. It was empty now, but the silence felt accusing. He pushed through the front doors into the afternoon sun. His personal car was in the lot. He got in, but he didn't start it. He just sat there, staring at the brick wall of the station he might never work in again. The familiar world had not just changed. It had shattered, and he was left sitting in the middle of the broken pieces, completely alone, with only the echoing, haunting sound of splashing water in his ears. The steering wheel of his sedan felt alien under his hands. It was too smooth, too small. It didn't have the heft and purpose of his patrol car's wheel. Dan sat in the station parking lot for a long time, the engine off, the only sound the slow tick of the cooling metal. Going home felt impossible. Facing his wife, his kids, with this void inside him? What would he even say? His phone, lying on the passenger seat, buzzed. He flinched. It was a text from his wife. Hey, everything okay? Heard there was some commotion on the scanner about an officer needing assistance on Maple. That wasn't you, was it? The scanner. Of course. The whole department, and probably half the town's busybodies with police scanners, had heard the 10 to 99 call for his badge number. His wife was a worrier. He couldn't tell her. Not like this, not in a text. He typed back, his thumbs clumsy. All fine. Something weird happened. Heading home. Talk then. He stared at the words, all fine. They were such a lie, they almost felt funny. He started the car and drove not home, but aimlessly. He found himself on the back roads that circled the town, past the old quarry, past the high school football field, where he'd worked security for years. Every landmark was a reminder of a life that seemed to be slipping away, like sand through his fingers. His mind was a stuck record, replaying the same few seconds from a dozen angles. The cup leaving his hand, the arc of the water, her face changing, the phone coming out. Each time he wanted to scream at his past self to stop, to just hand her the cup, to say welcome, and walk away. Why hadn't he just done that? Why did he always have to be the guy with the joke, the icebreaker? He thought about all the times it had worked making a nervous kid laugh during a traffic stop, cutting the tension with a shopkeeper who'd been robbed. He'd seen it as a skill, a way to be more than just a badge. Now, he saw it for what it probably always was, a way to assert control, to be the one who decided the tone of the interaction. And this time, with the wrong person, it had blown up in his face with the force of a bomb. He pulled over near the town's small, manicured park. Kids were on the swings, mothers chatting on benches. A normal afternoon. He watched them, feeling like a ghost. He was already outside of it. He was the topic of the hushed, scandalized conversations they'd have over dinner tonight. Did you hear what Officer Miller did? His own phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from a number he didn't recognize, but with a city area code. His heart jumped into his throat. The press? A county investigator? He let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a voicemail notification popped up. He put the phone to his ear, his hand shaking. A calm, professional woman's voice spoke. Officer Miller, this is Anya from the County Law Enforcement Agency, Office of Professional Standards. Please call me back at your earliest convenience to schedule a preliminary interview regarding the incident today. You are advised to have your union representation present. She left a number. The message was polite, sterile, and terrifying. Professional standards. Internal affairs, but at the county level. This was moving fast. Faster than anything in Fairview ever moved. He felt a surge of hot, sick fear. This wasn't just a talking to from the chief. This was a machine starting up, and he was caught in the gears. He finally pointed the car toward home. His house was a modest split level on a quiet cul-de-sac. The lawn was neat, the flower beds weeded. It was the house of a solid, dependable guy. As he pulled into the driveway, he saw his wife's car. She was home from her job at the elementary school office early. She must have been worried that she was waiting for him just inside the door, her arms crossed, her face pale. Dan, what's going on? Your text was weird. I heard things. He walked in, not meeting her eyes. He took off his shoes, a habit, and the simple normality of the action almost broke him. Where are the kids? He asked, his voice thick, still at aftercare. Don, talk to me. He led her into the living room and sat heavily on the couch. He told her. It spilled out in a messy, confused rush. The new neighbor, the water, the phone, the chief, the suspension. He tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, but as he spoke the words, even he could hear how feeble they sounded. He saw her expression change from concern to confusion, then to dawning horror. You threw water on her? A complete stranger? She asked, her voice low and disbelieving. I was trying to be funny. It was a hot day. Funny? She echoed. She stood up and walked to the window, her back to him. Dan, you're a 50-year-old police officer. You don't try to be funny by throwing things at people. At a woman. At a black woman you don't know. What were you thinking? Hearing it from her, his partner, the person who always had his back, was a different kind of shock. It stripped away the last of his defensive armor. "I wasn't thinking," he mumbled, staring at his hands. "I just did it." She turned around, her eyes wet. "Do you know what this looks like? Do you have any idea?" "The video. If she posts that video online, Dan, our lives, the kids' lives, they'll get teased. They'll get harassed. Your dad's the racist cop. Is that what you want?" The word racist hung in the air between them, ugly and final. He'd been avoiding it in his own mind. It wasn't about that, he insisted, but the protest was weak. Hadn't he seen a young black woman and made an assumption? An assumption that she would get his joke, that she would find his overly familiar physical prank acceptable from a stranger in uniform? He'd never have thrown water on old Mrs. Henderson down the street. He'd have handed her the cup politely. The realization was a gut punch. It doesn't matter what you think it was about. His wife cried, her composure breaking. It matters what it was. And what it was, you lost your temper and your judgment and you attacked someone. And now you're suspended. What happens next? Do you lose your job? What about the mortgage? What do I tell the kids when they ask why Daddy isn't going to work? He had no answers. He just sat there, a silent, shrinking man on his own couch. The house that had always been his sanctuary now felt like a cage. The walls seemed to be closing in, covered in the invisible writing of his failure. Later, after a silent, strained dinner with their confused children, Anne retreated to the small den. He couldn't sit still. He picked up a book, put it down. He turned on the TV, muted it. The silence was worse. He logged onto his computer, a reckless, morbid curiosity taking over. He went to the local community Facebook page. And there it was. Not the video. Thank God. Not yet. But the post dot, it was from a user he didn't recognize. But the text was chillingly neutral. Saw some serious police activity on Maple Lane today, around 3 p.m. New neighbor moving in. And Fairview PD was there in force, including the chief. Anyone know what happened? Looked intense. The comments were a wildfire. Heard an officer got into it with the new lady on Maple. Something about disrespect. My cousin's a dispatcher. Said it was a code 10-99 for Officer Miller. Something went really wrong. The new neighbor is a county bigwig. Heard she's some kind of police commissioner. Miller picked a fight with the wrong person. Always thought he was a bit of a bully with that good all-boy act. Let's not jump to conclusions. Dan's a good guy. Good guys don't get suspended on the spot. Dan slammed the laptop shut. His breath came in short gasps. It was everywhere. The rumor mill was grinding, and it was turning him into dust. The good guy defenders were being drowned out by the grim logic of the facts. He was suspended. The chief was involved. It was bad that he felt utterly alone. He couldn't call his buddies on the force. They were likely ordered not to talk to him. His union rep hadn't called yet. His wife was in the other room, a universe of disappointment away. He walked to the dark window and looked out at his quiet cul-de-sac. The street lights cast soft pools of orange light. It all looked the same, but nothing was. He was a man in freefall, waiting for the ground to rise up and meet him, and knowing that the impact was going to shatter everything he knew. The worst part wasn't the fear of losing his job. It was the slow, sickening understanding dawning on him, reflected in his wife's eyes and in the cold comments online, that maybe, in a way he had never allowed himself to see, he deserved it. The next 3 days were a strange kind of prison. The 4 walls of his house, which had always been a place of rest, now felt like they were holding him in. Time moved in a slow, sticky crawl. He'd wake up with a jolt at 5:30 a.m., his body still wired for his shift, and remember. The heavy, sick feeling would settle back into his stomach before his feet even hit the floor. He avoided the news. He couldn't bear to turn on the local TV channel. His wife tried to talk to him a few times, but the conversations were short and ended in more silence or quiet tears. She was terrified, and her fear was a constant, quiet pressure in the house. The kids knew something was very wrong. "Are you sick, Daddy?" his youngest had asked. "Yeah, buddy," Dan had replied, his voice rough. Something like that. His union representative, a weary-looking man named Phil, finally called on the second day. He wasn't encouraging. "It's bad, Dan, really bad. The county isn't playing around. They've fast-tracked the investigation. Deputy Chief Johnson hasn't released the video publicly, but she's provided it to professional standards. I've seen it." Dan's mouth went dry. And a long sigh came down the phone line. "And it's exactly what she said it was. You look like a guy who's just done something aggressive and is annoyed he's being questioned. The just a little welcome line doesn't sound friendly. It sounds dismissive. And when you puff up your chest and tell her you're going to run her plates, it looks like intimidation. The optics are a disaster. What do I do?" Dan asked, the question sounding small and pathetic. "You wait," Phil said flatly. "You keep your head down. You do not talk to anyone. And you start thinking about what you're going to say in your formal interview. Not excuses. Not justifications. You need to demonstrate some actual understanding of what you did wrong. Right now, your good service record is the only thing on the positive side of the ledger. But it's getting weighed against a very, very heavy piece of negative evidence." The call ended, leaving Dan feeling worse. Demonstrate some actual understanding. He sat in his den, trying to find that understanding. It kept slipping away, replaced by a swirling mess of shame, fear, and a stubborn, dying ember of resentment. Asterisk. Why did she have to overreact? Why couldn't she have just laughed it off? Asterisk. On the morning of the fourth day, a certified letter arrived from the county law enforcement agency. It was official notification of the formal internal investigation and a summons for an interview in 2 days' time. The language was cold and precise. It listed the potential policy violations: conduct unbecoming an officer, improper use of authority, discourteous treatment of the public. The last one, discourteous, seemed like such a small word for the earthquake it had caused. That afternoon, a different kind of storm arrived. His wife came into the den, her face ashen, holding her iPad. "It's on Facebook," she whispered. The local news station had run a story. It wasn't the lead, but it was there. The headline was careful: "Fairview officer suspended following incident with new resident." The report named no names at first, citing sources, but it mentioned Maple Lane, a new high-ranking county official, and an alleged physical altercation involving a liquid substance. It was just vague enough to be legally safe, but specific enough that anyone in Fairview knew exactly who and what it was about. Then they showed a clip. It wasn't the video from Deputy Chief Johnson's phone. It was a brief, shaky cell phone video taken from a distance, probably from a neighbor's window. The audio was bad, but you could see the figures clearly. You could see a man in a police uniform tossing something from a cup. You could see a woman stumbling back. You could see the uniformed man standing tall, hands on his belt, while the woman held up her phone. And you could see, very clearly, Chief Roberts arriving later, his body language one of deep apology. The news anchor moved on to the next story, about a new park, but the damage was done. The genie was out of the bottle. Dan's own phone began to vibrate, then ring. Numbers he didn't know. He silenced it. Texts started popping up. Some were from old friends, asking, "What the hell, Dan?" Some were from numbers he didn't recognize, and he was too scared to open them. The doorbell rang. His wife peeked through the blinds. "It's a woman with a notepad," she said, her voice trembling. "A reporter." They didn't answer. The bell rang again, then stopped. The feeling of being hunted, of being a specimen under glass, was overwhelming. He was the town scandal. The quiet, friendly cop was now the guy everyone was whispering about. He imagined the conversations at the diner, at the gas station. "I always knew there was something off about him. Thinks the rules don't apply to him." That night, lying awake next to his sleeping wife, the darkest thought yet came to him. It wasn't about his job or his reputation anymore. It was about the woman, Deputy Chief Johnson. He had reduced her, on her first day in her new home, to a victim. He had made her feel threatened, disrespected, and unsafe on her own property. He had taken a moment that should have been happy and exhausting, moving into a new place, and poisoned it with fear and anger. He saw her face again, not the angry one, but the first one, the tired but cheerful face of someone directing movers, starting a new chapter. And he had blotted it out with cold water and hostility. For the first time, he saw her as a person, not as an obstacle in his own story. He imagined her telling her family about it, feeling the need to check the locks that night, wondering what kind of town she'd moved to. The shame that washed over him was hotter and more painful than any fear about his pension. He had abused the tiny bit of power his uniform gave him to make someone feel small, and he'd done it for a laugh that never came. The next day, the formal interview loomed. Phil, the union rep, picked him up. "Remember," Phil said in the car, "listen to the questions. Answer only what is asked. Be respectful. And for God's sake, if they ask you why you did it, don't say it was a joke." The interview was held in a bland conference room at the County Administrative Building, not the friendly, worn-down Fairview station. Sitting across the table were two people from professional standards, a serious-looking man and the woman, Anya, whose voice he remembered from the voicemail. They were polite but distant. A court reporter sat in the corner, her fingers poised over a stenography machine. The click-clack of her keys was the only sound for a moment. They walked him through it, step by step. They showed him the video from Deputy Chief Johnson's phone on a laptop screen. Seeing it from that angle, from her perspective, was a brutal experience. He saw his own face, his smirk, the casual toss. He saw the shock on her face up close. He heard his own voice, sounding arrogant and dismissive. It was worse than he'd imagined. "Officer Miller," Anya asked, her tone neutral, "when you approached Deputy Chief Johnson, what was your intent?" Dan's rehearsed answers died in his throat. He looked at the paused image on the screen, his own foolish face. He thought of his wife's tears, his children's confusion, and the new neighbor's first day in her home, ruined. He took a shaky breath. "My intent." He started, then stopped. He corrected himself. "What I told myself was that I was being friendly, welcoming, but that wasn't true." "Not really." He saw Phil tense beside him, but he kept going, the words coming from a raw, honest place he didn't know he still had. "My real intent was to be in charge of the situation, to make a joke on my terms. I didn't think about her. I didn't think about how it would feel to have a stranger, a police officer, throw something at you. I just thought about what I thought was funny. I was careless. And when she reacted with rightful anger, I got defensive. I used my uniform to try to scare her into backing down. I was wrong. I was completely, totally wrong." The room was silent, except for the soft clicking of the court reporter's machine. The two investigators exchanged a brief, unreadable glance. They asked more questions, but the tone had shifted slightly. It was less like an interrogation and more like an examination. At the end, Anya asked one final question. "Is there anything you would like to say, for the record, to Deputy Chief Johnson?" Dan looked down at his own hands, clenched in his lap. He thought for a long moment. The easy, public apology the chief wanted him to make wasn't enough. Not for this, I would say. He began, his voice barely above a whisper, then cleared his throat. I would say that I am sorry for the fear I caused. I am sorry for disrespecting her in her own home. I am sorry that I made her first impression of this town one of hostility from someone who was supposed to protect it. And that I understand if she can't accept that. I understand if the consequences are severe. She deserves to feel safe. I took that from her. The interview was over. Phil guided him out of the building. In the parking lot, under the gray sky, Phil lit a cigarette. That was a risk, what you said in there, he muttered. But it was also the first smart thing you've done since this started. It might not save your job, but it might save a little piece of you. Dan drove home alone. He felt empty, scraped clean. The terror was still there, a cold stone in his gut. But mixed with it, for the first time, was a tiny, fragile sense of clarity. He had finally stopped fighting the truth. He had named his failure out loud in a room with a court reporter. He had finally seen the person he had hurt, that the waiting wasn't over. The hammer was still poised to fall, but the man waiting for it was different from them. The week that followed the interview was a strange, suspended state. There were no more phone calls from investigators. No more letters. The local news story had blown over, replaced by a debate about a new traffic light. The social media gossip had moved on to other dramas. For the outside world, the incident was fading. For Dan, it was a constant, quiet hum in the background of every thought, every moment. He started doing things around the house that he'd put off for years. He fixed the loose step on the back deck. He painted the garage door. The physical work was a relief. It was simple. It had a clear beginning and end. And his hands could be busy while his mind churned. His wife watched him, her expression still worried, but the ice between them had thawed a little. They started talking about practical things, the bills, the kids' school projects, what to make for dinner. They were careful conversations, skirting the enormous hole in the center of their lives. But they were talking. His children, sensing the shift, began to relax. His youngest climbed into his lap while he watched TV again. It was a small thing, but it made his throat tight. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed it. One afternoon, while raking leaves in the backyard, he saw Mr. Gable, the retired councilman from across Maple Lane, standing at the fence that separated their properties from the backyard of the house behind him. Mr. Gable gave a slow, measured wave. Dan, feeling a fresh wave of shame, waved awkwardly back, expecting the man to turn away. Instead, Mr. Gable leaned on the fence. Been keeping busy. I see, the older man said, his voice neutral. Trying to, Dan replied. Setting the rake down dot, Mr. Gable was quiet for a moment, looking at the neat pile of leaves. She's a tough one, that new deputy chief, he said finally, not looking at Dan. Fair, from what I hear. But tough. Doesn't suffer fools. Dan just nodded, unsure what to say. I've known you a long time, Dan, Mr. Gable continued. Seen you help a lot of folks. This was a damn fool thing. A real damn fool thing. He turned his head and looked directly at Dan. His eyes were sharp, but not unkind. The question is, was it just a moment of being a fool? Or is it who you are? It was the question Dan had been asking himself in the dark of night. He met the old man's gaze. I don't know yet, sir, he said honestly. But I'm trying to find out. Mr. Gable held his look for a beat longer, then gave a single, slow nod. Well, the trying counts for something. He pushed off from the fence and walked back toward his house without another word. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even friendship. but it was a thread of connection to his old life, thin but unbroken. The official letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks after the interview. It was from the County Law Enforcement Agency, Office of the Deputy Chief of Operations. His wife handed it to him, her hand trembling. They sat together at the kitchen table. The sunlight streamed in, too cheerful for the moment. He opened it. The language was formal, but clear dot. It stated that after a thorough investigation, Officer Daniel Miller was found to have violated departmental codes of conduct. The behavior was deemed egregious and incompatible with the standards of the office. However, it noted his long service record with no prior disciplinary issues, and it specifically referenced the apparent candor and remorse demonstrated in his subsequent interview. Then came the decision. He was not fired. A wave of dizzying, disbelieving relief washed over him, so strong he had to grip the edge of the table. But it was short-lived. He was demoted, permanently, stripped of his senior officer status and his badge number. He was to be reassigned, upon his return, to a non-public facing desk duty in the records department of the county headquarters, not the Fairview station. His pay was reduced significantly. He would be on a probationary period for 2 years, and he was required to complete a rigorous course of training in procedural justice, community relations, and implicit bias. Attached was a second separate sheet. It was a concise, direct memo from Deputy Chief Keisha Johnson herself. Officer Miller, it began, his decision is not an absolution. It is a consequence and an opportunity. Your actions caused tangible harm and eroded public trust. A termination would have been a clean end, but it would not have served the community's need for accountability and growth. You will have no further contact with the public in a law enforcement capacity. Your role will be administrative. This is to protect the community from you and to allow you the space to reevaluate what it means to wear a uniform. The mandated training is not a punishment. It is a requirement for your continued employment. You will engage with it fully and thoughtfully. I have reviewed your interview statement. Acknowledgement is the first necessary step. The next steps, genuine understanding and change, are harder, and they are yours alone to take. This resolution closes the official matter. It does not erase the incident. That will remain with me, and it will remain with you. Your future in this profession, in any capacity, now depends entirely on what you choose to learn from your profound failure. It was signed with her formal title. Dan read it twice, then handed it to his wife. She read it, her eyes filling with tears, this time of a shaky, tentative relief. They weren't ruined. They would keep their house. There would be a paycheck, a smaller one, but it was there. But as the initial shock wore off, Dan understood the true weight of it. He was not getting his old life back. The patrol car, the streets he knew, the respect of his neighbors, the sense of being a trusted figure, that was gone. He was being put in a corner, a quiet, paper-pushing corner, where he could do no more harm. It was a professional neutering. It was mercy, but it was a severe, humbling mercy. He called Chief Roberts. The chief's voice was tired. "I've seen the ruling. It's more than I hoped for, Dan. You should take it and be grateful. She could have buried you." "I know," Dan said. "Chief, thank you for trying." "Don't thank me," the chief replied. "Thank her for having a cooler head than you did." "And Dan, the training?" "Don't just sit through it. Listen." The first day of his new assignment was a study in quiet humiliation. The county records department was a maze of fluorescent lights and filing cabinets. He was given a small desk in a corner, away from the windows. His job was to digitize old arrest reports, a mind-numbing task of scanning and typing. His new colleagues were civil servants, not cops. They were polite but distant. They knew who he was. The story had trickled down. He was the cautionary tale who now worked among them. He went to the mandated training. It was a room full of officers from different departments, some there for minor infractions, some for routine refreshers. They talked about bias, about de-escalation, about the history of policing in communities of color. Dan listened. He heard things that made him uncomfortable. He heard stories from people who had felt exactly as Deputy Chief Johnson had felt targeted, disrespected, small before authority. For the first time, he didn't argue in his head. He just listened. Weeks turned into months. The routine was monotonous. Scan, type, file. Lunch alone at his desk. The drive to and from the county building. He missed the action, the purpose, the fresh air. But he also felt a strange, slow peace settling over him. The anxiety of waiting for the axe to fall was gone. The consequence was here, and he was living inside it. It was heavy, but it was solid ground that one evening in early spring. Almost 6 months after the incident, he was walking out of the county building toward his car. He saw her. Deputy Chief Johnson was standing near the entrance, speaking with 2 commanders, pointing to something on a clipboard. She looked professional, assured, and busy. Dan froze, then quickly changed direction, wanting to avoid her, to give her the space he knew she deserved. But she glanced up. Their eyes met across the parking lot. There was a beat of silence. Dan felt his face grow hot. He gave a small, stiff nod, an acknowledgement, nothing more. He expected her to look straight through him, to turn away. She didn't. She held his gaze for a second longer. Then she gave a single, brief, almost imperceptible nod in return. It wasn't a smile. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a simple recognition. Asterisk, I see you. You are here, and the consequence you earned. Asterisk. Then she turned back to her colleagues. Continuing her conversation, Dan got into his car. He sat for a minute, his hands on the wheel. He thought about the long fall from the sunny driveway on Maple Lane to this gray parking lot. He thought about the shame, the fear, the broken trust. He thought about the cup of water, now a permanent stain on his life. He had lost so much. His pride, his position, his sense of himself as a good guy. But as he started the car and drove toward home, toward his wife and his kids, and the quiet life he had left, he realized he had gained something too. A painful, hard-won understanding. The weight of the uniform wasn't about power. It was about responsibility. And he had failed it spectacularly. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a cop anymore, not in the way that mattered. He was a man who had done a deeply wrong thing and was being given a chance, a very narrow and confined chance, to try and be better. The road ahead was long, quiet, and humble. But for the first time, since the splash of cold water hit the warm pavement, he felt like he was finally facing in the right direction.